Very good.
All right, welcome to our session entitled Learning to Re-Inhabit Place, Explorations in Ecological Identity. I'm Dr. Emily Bretl.
And I'm Dr. Matthew Clay.
Great, so just to introduce you a bit to what we were doing here for this, the practices we took on, our goal was to use this opportunity to reflect on our own ecological identities. We're both experienced ecological educators, and we were looking to spend some time intentionally deepening those practices. We wanted to try practices specifically from the book Ecological Identity, Becoming a Reflective Environmentalist by Mitchell Tomashow. And then we really wanted to discuss with each other what those experiences were like and how we might use them in our own work in teacher education and professional development.
So ecological identity as a concept, Tomashow describes it as the whole of the cognitive, intuitive, and affective perceptions of ecological relationships. And ultimately that influences a person's life choices and how they interact with the world. And so ecological identity provides a lot of context to connect what we do and why we do it through an ecological lens. And then with our interest, we're thinking of that with an eye toward teaching and learning.
Right, and this ecological identity isn't something that is really talked about in many teaching programs. And so the practices that are offered here, again, are really about being intentional about diving into this as a way of teaching and introducing teachers earlier to this as an opportunity for how they engage with their own teaching and their students' learning. So the book, we'll hold up the actual hard copy of the book here, is full of not just philosophy and also history of ecological education and sustainability education, but it also has a number of different activities. We only chose to do 2 activities for the purposes of this presentation. So we will be talking about drawing maps of childhood special places and also the eco-confessional, but we've included here a sampling of some of the other activities or practices that are offered in ecological identity, because it really is a rich resource if this is something that you think you might want to dive more deeply into in your own practice or bring into your education programs.
So the first practice that we looked at and did was drawing maps of childhood special places. And Tomashow really opens up that what a map can be can look very differently in how different folks interpret it. But the goal is to convey the memories and experiences that go along with that place and use the map as a tool to to help communicate and discuss those.
Right. And what was really interesting, both about how Tomashow presents it, but also our experience, is that there's at least as many ways of drawing or creating a map as there are people. So I think I'll talk a little bit about the type of map I made, and then Dr. Clay can speak a little bit about his map, and then we'll talk about a little more in depth of some of the takeaways. So my approach to drawing a map was actually not even initially drawing something that would resemble a map. I just started by journaling about my favorite childhood places, especially those ones connected to nature or the outdoors, and starting to see what came up when I just wrote about those very open-ended. And it was interesting to me that very few of those special places had anything to do with school. Most of them were actually really about being with plants and people that I love, mostly outdoors, but sometimes, in, somebody's kitchen with a plant or arranging flowers. But that's what I really took away. So my map of special places actually ended up being more of an artwork. It's still in process, but was doing some paintings of some of the plants and some drawings, hold that up, of some of the plants that I recognize as being special to me that were directly related to the places. So plants I might have seen in a certain location, and writing and reflecting on some of the stories behind that.
And for me, I thought of a very specific individual place, which was the 5 acres of land around my home that we lived in when I was in elementary school. And so my kind of first steps in creating a map is that I actually went back and looked at historic satellite imagery, trying to go back to close to the time when I lived there, comparing that to the modern day. I actually ended up looking at a handful of other different types of maps and layers, and use those to kind of mark out where some of these particular spots that were special to me, where they were at the time I lived there, and even where those would be now in the present day, even though a lot of those have changed and they're gone. And so in that, I was able to really think about this place that I spent a lot of time as a young child, but haven't really thought about a whole lot since.
Yeah, absolutely. We actually, in this presentation, we don't have the time to share much more than a brief overview, but we actually spent the better part of an hour and a half swapping stories about our memories of childhood special places and sharing pictures and drawings with each other. And really even, asking each other questions about, well, what was that like? Or who was with you? How far away was it? And kind of deepening our own reflections on those special places together. So what we both ended up saying were some of the big takeaways was, the first one was that we had such distinct approaches to drawing maps, right? That we did the same experience, but came at it from completely different angles, which, both personally helped us to kind of expand our imaginations of what a map might be, but also was a reminder that this is what our students might do as well, that there are so many different ways to interpret that, that activity or practice of drawing a map. And that doing so really allows the personality of the map maker to come about.
And so one of the things that sort of emerged from this was we started to both realize some of the bias of our own experiences, and how that shapes our teaching today, and how we learn. And so for me personally, one of the things that really surprised me and really kind of emerged from it was recognizing the privilege I'd had as a young child, that every day I had this space outdoors I could explore, really without any constraints, and recognizing that practice and those opportunities are something that filter into my teaching mindset, and how I prefer to learn, and that I tend to lean towards unstructured opportunities to really explore an idea or a concept. And in many ways, I think that was influenced by those early childhood experiences, but I really had not made that connection until this participating in this practice.
Yeah, and similarly, in even describing and discussing with Dr. Clay, my own map and the different plants and my relationships, it helped draw out for me that importance of those, really enthusiastic, loving mentors in my life that helped me to connect with these plants and with these places, and that interplay between place and plant, and my love for the world. And that, for me, in my own teaching, comes out a lot of times of me, just sharing experiences with young people or with educators in nature, or with plants. And that's something, kind of like Dr. Clay said, that I hadn't really thought about until discussing it and going, oh, actually, that's a really interesting kind of way of looking at how I teach, and how something I've come to see as, oh, that's just part of my personality, that actually perhaps it was really shaped by these early experiences with people that I loved and cared for me in places that I loved, or came to love through interacting with them and the plants. And another thing that Dr. Clay and I talked about was that even for us as very experienced educators, and particularly ecological educators, people teaching through lenses of sustainability and place, that there was so much opportunity for us to continue to deepen our understanding of our own ecological identity. And it really made us think, what would this be like then to be a new teacher or a pre-service teacher, being introduced to these ideas early on, and how might that filter into approaches to teaching and learning over time, if we allow for that.
And so one of the big takeaways we had in terms of applying this activity to teacher education or professional development, the activity is really kind of designed to be completed individually, but the discussion for both of us led to much deeper insights, both in listening to each other and hearing someone else's experience, but just the process of sharing and speaking through it. And so the discussion part and the social aspect was really beneficial, and the opportunity to share what it was these places meant to us, and how those experiences shaped us.
Yeah, absolutely. And then we also thought that that using these maps, especially if they were something that you did early on in a course, or in a teacher education program, could be a real benefit to the teacher educators, to help us better understand and advise our pre-service or developing teachers as individuals, right? And to help see what experiences have shaped them, and use those sorts of ideas to give them better feedback, or to help them create lesson plans, or to offer them ideas for deepening their own practice. I also think that the maps were a really interesting way to move in to considering ecological perspectives in teaching. And Dr. Clay, did you want to say a little bit more about that?
Right. So one of the things I think is really interesting about these maps is it gives a chance to have a discussion around a particular place, which is a lot easier entry point than some of these really kind of weighty ideas. And so this can be a great way to start those conversations about topics that are really important, but for some of our teachers are going to be difficult to just discuss out of the blue. And then finally, we saw a really great opportunity to extend this activity into discussing special places in the school for both pre-service and in-service teachers, to really think about during their school experience, the places that meant a lot to them in the school, and the characteristics of those, and why it was that those places meant so much, and then ultimately how that should influence their practice as teachers.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing that struck me when we were discussing is Dr. Clay was talking about, instead of just coming at these ideas, from an abstract point of view of like, how could you teach for ecological literacy, or how could you, what kinds of special places do you hope to create in your classroom, is really grounding them in the teacher's practical experience from their own life, and carrying that forward.
And so our second activity is called an eco-confessional. And so the idea is just that participants share personal stories of ecological irresponsibility?
Yeah, so this one it was pretty fun. We both found that identifying individual stories was difficult for both of us. They were kind of ongoing irresponsibility that we're still trying to sort through in both of our own lives. We will say that trust is critical among participants with this. So we've known each other for, I think that at this point, about 6 years, if we do the math, maybe 7. But, and we've worked on lots of projects. So there's a lot of trust built up between us that we can share things that might, not be things that we would share with a general audience. And that's definitely something that Tamasho says as well. And the goal is really to explore the tensions of having an ecological identity, not to like shame or blame anybody. So just, one of the few that I shared with Dr. Clay was, that I still tend to buy a lot of my books on Amazon. I used to live overseas and I got into the habit of buying them, with my Kindle. And that does sort of bring like quite a cringe to me. And it's something that I grapple with and I'm trying to get better about. But I share that, as something that I was willing to share openly. We discussed it a bit more. And I just want to share that here as kind of an example of an eco confessional. Could be a really quick tale or it could be a long drawn out story. Did you want to add anything?
Yeah, and with that, like in the tensions, for me, I shared a story of driving around kind of pointlessly during a camping trip that got cold to warm up before the evening. And the irony was that this driving around is about 2 miles from this big climate education project space I'm working on. And so these two things like coexist, and and for me they happen to be like in very close location. But in that we get the chance to explore that there's tension and there's complexity, and that's important for our teachers to be able to see that.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So kind of the discussion part generated the sense of what we termed this kind of community through mutual discomfort, right? By sharing these moments of kind of embarrassment or like, oh, I wish I had done better, that it created a sense of community, even though we were sharing things that maybe we weren't too proud of.
And then with that, we also kind of saw those mistakes and missteps and the things that we weren't super proud of are really just kind of steps on this longer journey of for us in ecological education, and to be able to recognize those as just kind of missteps on a longer journey. And then ultimately, as in a teacher education role, I think this has an opportunity to be a really powerful tool to humanize the educator, for pre-service or in-service teachers, especially when there's the opportunity that maybe the pre-service teachers are going to think that, this teacher educator has it all figured out, and it's a great way to use a story that can be kind of comical for they certainly don't have it all the way figured out. We make mistakes, but even while making mistakes, this is something that we still are working on and still trying to improve and deepen our own understanding.
Absolutely. And just these are some of our takeaways in conclusion, when thinking about exploring your own ecological identity and re-inhabiting place, especially as educators, is that even with just 2 of us, both trying the practices and then discussing them together was really meaningful. We both gained insights into our practices and ourselves that surprised both of us. And we like to imagine what that would be like in a small group with other educators, or over time sharing in these experiences and discussions over the course of a semester, even as you're really deepening your ecological identity with more than just 2 people.
And one of the other points really took away is that this is work that really needs to be intentional, that really considering ecological identity is not something that's going to happen accidental. And like Dr. Bretl said, even for those two of us who are really experienced in this area, until we were very intentional about doing activities to look at these things, there's things we just had not considered. And so it's important that in teacher education, especially for ecological education, that we're very intentional about helping our teachers develop and discover their ecological identities.
Yeah, and then also recognizing that our ecological identities are these ongoing and evolving aspects of who we are. You know, that you might start one way of viewing yourself and your view of the world and how you want to teach, and that will change over time with your experiences, with your, you know, as you deepen your own understanding of the complexity of, you know, sustainable living, or ecological literacy, or what it means to teach for justice, these aspects of what it means to, you know, create a better world, teach for a better world. They will change, and you will change along with the places around you as well. So I think, unless there's anything else we're going to add, I'd say thank you so much for joining us for this presentation, and we encourage you to keep exploring your own ecological identity.
Thank you so much.